Makeva Jenkins worked for everything she had in life, pulling her family out of poverty through working multiple jobs and running her own business. Soon she was on social media sharing her rags to riches story, but when she was murdered, some wondered if it was her riches the killer was after. I'm Charlie and welcome to Crimelines. Hello and welcome to Crimelines. Just a quick reminder to check the show notes to get tickets to the True Crime Podcast Festival, which is next month in Denver, Colorado. I can't believe it's coming up so quickly. Use code Charlie for 15% off your ticket, and you'll also see a link to get tickets to the Berkshire Podcast Festival, which is in October in Massachusetts, and those really do look like the only two events I'm doing this year, unless something else pops up within driving distance of my home. As an extrovert, I really look forward to the few times I do get to hang out and chat with listeners and other podcasters, so I would love if you could make it out to either of those events. Again, those links are in the show notes. Let's go ahead and get into today's episode. We are going to start with Makeva Harold, who was born in August of 1983, and she grew up in a town called Belle Glade, Florida. I had never heard of Belle Glade before, but it is on the western edge of Palm Beach County. But it's said that it has very little in common with the rest of Palm Beach County. It is widely known, unfortunately, for poverty, unemployment, and, as goes hand in hand with those things, high crime. But one thing they've done really well is develop football players. They regularly produce more NFL players than any other high school in the U.S. But for someone like Makeva, who wasn't exactly going to play football, the town didn't seem to offer very much. Since she was a little girl, Makeva's family thought she was special. She was bright, outgoing, and charismatic. So they poured a lot of their energy and resources into her. Makeva's mom, Quest, has been described by the family as a bit of a hurricane, and to keep Makeva from getting swept up with her, her grandmother insisted on having Makeva live with her full time. But that didn't mean her mom was out of her life. Quest was around even though she didn't live with her, and when Makeva was 11, her brother Quay was born. They were very close, with Makeva being very protective of him. Makeva grew up knowing that the only way out of Belle Glade was to push her way out. After high school, where she graduated top of her class and was homecoming queen, she went to the University of South Florida in Tampa, which is 3 hours away from her home. And it was while going to school there, when Makeva was about 19 or 20, she and her boyfriend found out that she was pregnant. While that type of news stops some people from finishing school, like me, Makeva had her eye on that diploma. She had two priorities going forward, her daughter and her education. Makeva went on not just to get her bachelor's degree, but also her master's in business. She moved back to Palm Beach County with her little girl and started working towards building her own business, or really I should say businesses. From event planning to tax preparation, she was really trying to find a need in the community that she could fill, and that would in turn bring in the clients. Makeva was not afraid of hard work, and she had the patience needed to get a company off the ground. But she could also see when it wasn't working out and would then pivot to something else. So Makeva was still working on finding her business opportunity when, in 2009, she went to a New Year's Eve celebration at church. She was 26 years old, and her faith was very important to her, so it's really not a surprise that she spent her New Year's Eve not out partying, but rather with her family at church. While there, Makeva noticed the guest of another church member who she had never met before. And Makeva, as outgoing as she was, went ahead and made her own introductions. He was 23-year-old Yuri Jenkins. Yuri was a licensed barber, and like Makeva, he hoped to build his own business. The two started dating, and it wasn't long before Makeva found out that she was pregnant with her second child. She was very happy about this. She saw Yuri as her soulmate. She was ready to build a family with him. The problem was that Yuri wasn't only seeing Makeva at the time, and his other girlfriend was also pregnant. Some of Makeva's family members tried to warn her against continuing a relationship with Yuri. Clearly, he was not as serious about her as she was about him, and here he was about to have another baby, which would be a complication in their family, not to mention the child support, and it just seemed like, maybe don't commit to this guy. But Makeva believed Yuri when he assured her that she was the only one he wanted to be with. Makeva decided to accept the situation on the whole, forgive Yuri, and the two married. The first 2 years of their marriage were pretty rocky. Money was tight as they were both trying to build businesses and careers. In 2012 and 2013, things were so bad, in spite of Makeva working at least 2 jobs, that they didn't even have their own home. And Yuri would come and go, sometimes leaving for an overnight, sometimes he'd be gone a couple of days without an explanation. Makeva suspected he was cheating on her, and that was confirmed when the other woman, Tiffany, got pregnant. Makeva and Yuri separated, and it looked like they were heading for divorce, but Yuri wanted to get back together with Makeva. He promised things would change, and according to Makeva's family, she was so in love with Yuri that she would forgive almost anything. Around the time they reconciled, Makeva finally found the business idea that worked for her. It was actually Yuri's idea, but her execution. Makeva had the education and the experience with writing business plans and working strategically to build a small business. So what if she took what she learned and what she knew and helped other entrepreneurs get started? Makeva started the Prime Enterprise Group, and she finally found that gap that needed to be filled in the world of hopeful small business owners. She found the people with the ideas and the dreams, and she helped them plot out the plan from point A to point B. In addition to offering full services like writing the business plans for people, Makeva started offering business coaching, whether it was one session just to flesh out an idea or an ongoing mentorship. Makeva was always available. And then she started offering online classes on how to write your own business plan, which was a much more affordable option for people who just couldn't swing a full-service agency. And the main way Makeva promoted her business was on social media. She would do Facebook Lives multiple times a week to give people business advice and to answer questions and to let people know about what services she can provide for them. And mind you, she did all of this while still working her day job as a social worker for the Department of Children and Family Services. The 2 incomes she was bringing in combined pushed her into the 6 figures. Makeva went from not having a roof over her head to making over $100,000 a year, and she did it in about 2 years' time. She, Yuri, and their 2 kids moved into a very nice rental home in Lake Worth Beach, and it was just a temporary step as she rebuilt her credit so she could eventually buy a house. She had enough room here that her younger brother Quay was able to move in with them, and Yuri set up his barbershop in the garage. Having the barbershop in the garage helped with overhead as renting a space was too expensive, and it also allowed Yuri to work around the kids' schedule. With Makeva essentially working 2 jobs, sometimes 3 because she would still do people's taxes during tax season, someone had to be around to take care of the kids. In May of 2016, Yuri and Makeva had another child, a daughter, and things didn't seem like they could get any better. The only issue they really had hanging over their heads was Yuri's child support, which he was behind on for both of his other children. It was around $10,000 in arrears with both children, so we're talking closer to $20,000 total. And from what it sounds like, Yuri even ended up getting his driver's license suspended over the non-payment. In the same month that Yuri and Makeva's daughter was born, one of the mothers, Tiffany, filed a lawsuit for the back child support. Tiffany was the woman Yuri cheated with after he and Makeva had married, so not only was this a continuing reminder of the affair, the timing was pretty awful because Makeva just had a baby. Makeva made it clear that she wasn't going to just pay off his child support arrearage out of her income. That was his responsibility as a father. It wasn't hers. And Makeva did vent to friends about the situation. So much of Yuri's money was going to child support and back child support that she was pretty much entirely supporting the family. Makeva also felt that vigilance that people who have been cheated on feel, particularly as they're rebuilding trust. Because Yuri had a child with Tiffany, they couldn't just leave the affair or Tiffany in the past. While Yuri said he had to talk to Tiffany about their child, Makeva suspected more was going on. In the early part of 2017 and going into the spring, Makeva confided in some friends that she was seriously considering a divorce. She still loved Yuri and she loved the life they had, but could she really stay in a marriage where she was continually wondering if he was cheating? But relationships are rarely all good or all bad, and that's definitely the case here. Yuri had a lot of great features about him as a partner. He was an amazing father, at least to the kids they had in their home, and he was a big support to Makeva in a practical sense. She would send him text instructions of what needed to be done day in and day out, and he would largely do those things. She didn't have to worry about what to do with the baby when her older daughter had an out-of-town basketball game. She didn't have to worry about being home after school when she was meeting with clients an hour or two away. Yuri would take care of all of that. He would handle dinner time and bath time and bedtime and anything else, which is why Makeva could focus on building her business. She recognized how much harder her life would be if she didn't have a partner who could be home with the kids. Now, this is a bit of an aside, but this absolutely made me think of this. Years ago, I asked someone who had been podcasting full-time for a while how he balanced work and family while he was working at home. I kept finding myself getting nothing done because the kids were sick or there was a snow day, and then I would have periods of absolutely no family time because I was spending all day and night catching up on the podcast. He gave me some really great feedback on setting boundaries and time blocking and all of that. But what he didn't mention, that I found out later, was that his wife was a stay-at-home mom. He didn't mention her at all in how he balances work and children, even though I know for a fact that his ability to work when his kids were sick or home from school hinged completely on them always having access to the other parent. It is absolutely a different dynamic when you have a parent who has a flexible schedule, whether because they're a stay-at-home parent or they can set their own hours like Yuri and his barbershop, versus when you have two parents who work full-time and have to be in an office. In this case, Makeva recognized the type of support she had and that she needed it to do what she wanted to do with her career. She would even post about it on social media, how much she appreciated everything Yuri did and how he supported her. I mean, I can't really comment on how he treated his other children, but within their home, he was very involved with the kids he had with Makeva, and that included his stepdaughter. Sometime around May of 2017, Makeva stopped talking about divorce. She again started posting how much she loved Yuri, and it seemed like the two had patched up whatever went wrong. And they were working actively towards their next dream, which was to buy a home. Makeva's goal was to be in the house by Christmas of 2017 so that they could invite everyone over to celebrate the holidays and, as her brother Quay said, show everyone that she had made it. But that dream came to an end on June 29th, 2017, when Makeva's brother Quay called 911 at 2:17 in the morning. On this call, he was absolutely hysterical, and he said that someone in a black mask had come into the home and shot his sister. Then the shooter left, driving a white Charger. First responders got to the scene and found 33-year-old Makeva Jenkins in her bed with a single gunshot wound to the head. She was alive, but barely, so she was rushed off to the hospital. The investigators then took statements from everyone in the house, everyone who was an adult, obviously. Makeva's 13-year-old daughter was in Tampa visiting her father for 2 weeks, and her other children, who were ages 1 and 7, had been taken to a neighbor's house. The adults in the house were Makeva's brother Quay, her husband Yuri, and Yuri's friend, 19-year-old Dimitri Dale. Now, Yuri was in his early 30s, but he knew Dimitri and Dimitri's family through the church where Yuri's father was a pastor. Because of their age difference, they didn't really get to know each other until Dimitri was older, and he had, when he was 18, joined the Freemasons, which Yuri and his father also belonged to. So as adults, they were getting along, they had more in common, and they hung out together periodically. They're back. I want to thank June's Journey for sponsoring this podcast yet again, but also for sponsoring my downtime because I love to play this game, usually at night while I'm trying to unwind. At the core, June's Journey is a hidden object mystery game. So you are finding objects from the parlors of New York to the sidewalks of Paris, all while moving through this storyline, bringing you back to the glamour of the 1920s. You play as June Parker, who's an amateur detective who is trying to uncover a scandalous family secret. And her job, which means it's your job, is to uncover the truth behind the unexplained death of her sister. And while I love the hidden object part of the game, I love how cleverly they're hidden, I love how beautifully illustrated the scenes are, the thing I actually like the most about this game is that whenever I open the app, ready to unwind, there's always something to do. Whether I am customizing my own estate island, or I'm playing with or against other players in the detective club, or I'm collecting scraps of information about the different characters in the story, I never run out of things to do. Whether you're craving a good mystery or just looking for an escape, discover your inner detective when you download June's Journey for free today on iOS and Android. Yuri and Quay both told the police that they were just hanging out when Makeva came home from working with a client that day. She was very tired, so she went to bed early, around 9 o'clock. Quay and Yuri were watching TV when Quay ran to 7-Eleven to pick up some sodas and some cigarettes. When he got back, Yuri and his friend Dimitri Dale were there hanging out in the garage. Quay was ready to head to bed himself because at this point it was nearly 2 a.m. But Yuri told Quay he wanted to go ahead and cut his hair. Now, Quay had been asking for a haircut for nearly a month at that point, and Yuri just kept putting it off. So while it was weird to want to finally do it at 2 a.m., it wasn't really out of the blue because Quay had been asking for a haircut, so he got in the chair. Yuri had made it partway through the haircut when a man dressed in all black came through the open garage door and pointed a gun at them. The man started ordering them around, but Quay first thought it was a joke, some type of prank a friend was pulling, so he laughed. The man then pointed the gun at him and assured him that this was no joke. The man was described as being tall, over 6 feet, and all they could see through his mask were his eyes. Quay told the investigator that the man seemed vaguely familiar, but he didn't exactly recognize him. The man started yelling, "Where's Quest? Where's the money? Where's Quest? Where's the money?" over and over again. And now, if you remember, Quest was Makeva and Quay's mother. At gunpoint, the man forced all 3 men inside the house and up to the 2nd floor where the bedrooms were. The 1-year-old was asleep in a playpen downstairs, and the 7-year-old was sleeping in his bedroom near where they were standing. Yuri told the gunman that his kids were in the house, they were sleeping, and Dimitri asked if he could at least take the little boy downstairs to safety. And the gunman said yes. Dimitri then picked up the sleeping 7-year-old and went downstairs with him. The intruder then pointed the gun at Quay and ordered him back downstairs as well. The two went down and out the back door to the fenced yard where Dimitri was with Makeva's son. The gunman said he needed keys to a car, but Quay didn't have his on him, so Dimitri, who drove that white Charger, handed the keys over. There is a little discrepancy in this next detail. Dmitry said the gunman briefly went back inside before coming back out to get Quay and forced him, at gunpoint, back into the house. But Quay's version seems to omit the gunman having gone back inside without him. This seems like something that could have just easily been forgotten in the trauma of what was happening. Regardless, the gunman then led Quay back upstairs and ordered Quay and Yuri to lie face down. He then walked into the primary bedroom. While lying there, Quay suggested to Yuri that they take the gunman on. It was 2 against 1 after all, but Yuri said no. He said he was too scared that they would get shot. The men then heard the gun go off, and the masked man ran out of the house, jumped into Dmitry's white Charger, and drove off. Quay and Yuri ran into the bedroom, and they saw a small hole behind Makeva's ear. She hadn't even woken up to the man in the room. Yuri cradled her, begging her to hang in there while Quay called 911. After giving their statements, Quay and Yuri were allowed to go to the hospital. When they got there, they learned that Makeva had not made it. Yuri became very upset, and he essentially stormed off, saying he had to go check on his children. Meanwhile, Quay saw his mother Quest at the hospital, and he just lost it, saying, "What did you do? What did you do?" Quest had no idea what he was talking about, but the gunman had clearly said he was looking for Quest, and he wanted to know where the money was. So obviously, Quay thought this was connected to something his mom had done. Quest did have a criminal record, and she had a history of substance abuse. There was a rumor going around that she had stiffed a dealer recently, passing some fake bills to him during some exchange. With the gunman asking for Quest, Quay thought this must be that dealer that she owed money to. The investigators, of course, followed up with this lead immediately, but it went nowhere fast. Quest had no idea who would be after her and knew even less why they would be looking for her at Makeva's house. She had last seen Makeva over a month before on Mother's Day, but otherwise, she was 45 minutes away in Belle Glade, where she always was. If someone was really looking for her, they would have just knocked on her front door. Another angle looked into early on was Makeva's Facebook posts. Her business was to guide people to success, and are people really going to follow someone who hadn't been successful in business themselves? Of course not. So to some degree, Makeva had to sell her own success on the platform. So she talked about how she pulled her family out of homelessness. She talked about how much money she made, including sharing a recent bank statement that showed her business had brought in $20,000 that month. Was it possible that someone saw that and decided to rob her? If that was the plan, they failed miserably because the only thing they took was Dmitry's vehicle, which was a rental, and they abandoned it a quarter mile from the house where the police were able to seize and impound it for a search. So this scenario did not make sense as a robbery. In fact, very little about this home invasion made sense. The gunman walked into that garage and was outnumbered 3-1. The only thing he had going in his favor was the gun. But while he had them all contained upstairs at gunpoint, he allowed one of them, Dmitry, to take the 7-year-old downstairs. So Dmitry was free of the gunman, and he did what exactly? Did he run and alert the neighbors? Did he get the kids in his car and speed off to get help or at least get them to safety? No. He went into the backyard, an enclosed backyard, and waited even as the gunman came downstairs and demanded the keys and then went back upstairs. And what about Yuri's behavior? The gunman let Dmitry go downstairs unaccompanied, but then he kept Quay at gunpoint and made him go downstairs when he went to demand the keys. So that left Yuri upstairs with no gun pointed at him. And what did Yuri do? Did he make a break for it? Did he wake Makeva up and tell her to go hide from this home invader? Did he grab the phone and call 911? No. Just like Dmitry, he just patiently waited for the gunman to return. Quay was the only one who always had the gun on him, and he never had a chance to run off. He was also the only one who expressed wanting to try to overpower the intruder, even though he was significantly smaller than the shooter, and he was smaller than Yuri and Dmitry as well. It's almost like Yuri and Dmitry knew that they and the children weren't in any danger, but Quay was clearly in the dark. And Quay might have realized all of this in the moment if he hadn't been, understandably, so focused on the gun being pointed at him and worried that he was about to die. But the investigators, who were not operating in the heat of a terrifying moment, saw these holes in the stories from the jump. The investigation was looking closely at Dmitry and Yuri, who seemed, on the surface, to be cooperating as witnesses. One of the first things the investigators did was get a search warrant for the white Charger. Inside, they didn't find anything as incriminating as the killer's fingerprints, but they did find fast food receipts from June 28th, covering several hours leading up to the murder. They decided to pull the security footage from the 3 different restaurants, and 2 of them didn't really give them anything useful, but the third place was a sub shop that Dmitry went to at 10:38, less than 4 hours before the shooting. Dmitry went through the drive-thru, but his car ran out of gas. It was blocking the window, so a passenger in his car got out and started to push the car from behind to get it out of the way. The man was caught on the security camera, and his build was similar to that of the shooter. The investigators went to Dmitry and asked him who his passenger was. He eventually admitted that it was his friend Jovan Joseph. He and Jovan had been friends for a few years at that point. According to what Jovan would later say, they met through a group that helped at-risk teens. Jovan was there because his family ran the program, and Dmitry was there as a troubled teen receiving services. Dmitry had taken Jovan over to Yuri's house earlier in the day to get a haircut, and then they left. He said he dropped Jovan off at his house, and when he went back to the house later that night, while Quay was at the 7-Eleven, he came without Jovan. The investigators decided they wanted to know what 19-year-old Jovan Joseph had to say about that, so they sat him down for a recorded interview. Jovan said that he had never met Yuri before that day. He went there because Dmitry said Yuri could give him a haircut, and afterwards, they played basketball in the driveway. Interestingly, Quay had also brought this up in his second statement to the police. When he went through the lead-up to the home invasion, he mentioned that Dmitry had a friend over and they played basketball. And then he commented that the friend had a similar build to the shooter, but Quay didn't know his name. Jovan insisted that after Dmitry brought him home that evening, he did not go back out to Makeva and Yuri's house. He said he had no reason to. Jovan's alibi for the night wasn't the usual 2 a.m. alibi of being home asleep. It was instead that he had gone to the hospital to sit with a friend who needed the company. He told the police he arrived there around 2:30 in the morning, and the hospital was 30 minutes away from Makeva's home, so he couldn't have been the shooter and have been at the hospital. The investigators pretty clearly didn't believe him, and I know I say again and again we cannot judge someone's reaction to a stressful situation, and being interviewed by the police when you're 19 years old is a stressful situation. But I really couldn't help it here. If you want to hear what a guilty liar sounds like, just listen to his interrogation. Anyway, Jovan was released while they followed up on his alibi. They were able to view the hospital security footage, and they saw Jovan walk in to visit his friend just like he said. But the footage they could see right away wasn't time-stamped. It could have been 2:30 in the morning, but it really could have been any time. They had to subpoena the digital footage that would have the time-stamped information, and that would take weeks to get. And while they were waiting on that, Makeva's autopsy results came back. As expected, she had been killed by a gunshot wound to the head, but they found out something else. Makeva was pregnant. She was far enough along that she and Yuri knew she was expecting, but early enough that they hadn't announced it yet. And the timing also corresponds with Makeva dropping talk of getting a divorce. It did seem strange to the investigators that Yuri had not mentioned that she was pregnant to anyone Not to the paramedics trying to save her life, not to the police, not to her family, no one. When he was asked about this, Yuri said he thought he told them, but it wasn't documented anywhere and no one remembered him saying it. Makeva's funeral was held about a week and a half after her murder. So many people who loved Makeva and were inspired by her shared their memories and their heartbreak on social media. But one person did the opposite, hours after the funeral, and that was Tiffany, the mother of Yuri's child. She made an ill-thought-out Facebook Live rant about a lot of things regarding her relationship to Yuri, but the main issue here was how she talked about Makeva. There was no love lost between the two, which is to be expected. I am sure Tiffany did not see the best side of Makeva, and she didn't see the best side of Tiffany. So Tiffany went on about how Makeva wasn't this great person everyone said she was, and that she wasn't sad Makeva was dead. She even said something about going to the funeral and slapping Makeva out of her casket. The investigators had also learned from one of Makeva's friends that Tiffany had been sending her messages leading up to the murder, accusing her of keeping Yuri away from his child, and the friend remembered there was even a threat in there to beat Makeva up. So the investigators decided to speak with Tiffany, and she told them that she regretted the video. She was frustrated with the situation and over everyone painting Yuri and Makeva's life as perfect. She said that at the time of Makeva's death, Yuri was still talking to her, and the day after her murder, he tried to kiss her. 2 days after Makeva's murder, he spent the night at Tiffany's place, though he later claimed he slept on the couch. Regardless, Tiffany made it clear to the police that Yuri was not the grieving widower he pretended to be. Tiffany was not the shooter, since the gunman was a man who was at least 6 feet tall, and she did not match that description. It was possible that she hired someone, but after talking to her, the police just didn't see it as a possibility. Tiffany being behind the murder plot just did not explain Yuri and Dimitri's inaction on the night of the murder when the gunman left them alone. They're back. I want to thank June's Journey for sponsoring this podcast yet again, but also for sponsoring my downtime because I love to play this game, usually at night while I'm trying to unwind. At the core, June's Journey is a hidden object mystery game. So you are finding objects from the parlors of New York to the sidewalks of Paris, all while moving through this storyline, bringing you back to the glamour of the 1920s. You play as June Parker, who's an amateur detective who is trying to uncover a scandalous family secret. And her job, which means it's your job, is to uncover the truth behind the unexplained death of her sister. And while I love the hidden object part of the game, I love how cleverly they're hidden, I love how beautifully illustrated the scenes are, the thing I actually like the most about this game is that whenever I open the app, ready to unwind, there's always something to do. Whether I am customizing my own estate island, or I'm playing with or against other players in the detective club, or I'm collecting scraps of information about the different characters in the story, I never run out of things to do. Whether you're craving a good mystery or just looking for an escape, discover your inner detective when you download June's Journey for free today on iOS and Android.
If you love chilling mysteries, unsolved cases, and a touch of mom-style humor, Moms and Mysteries is the podcast you've been searching for. Hey guys, I'm Mandy.
And I'm Melissa. Join us every Tuesday for Moms and Mysteries, your gateway to gripping, well-researched true crime stories. Each week, we deep dive into a variety of mind-boggling cases as we shed light on everything from heists to whodunits. We're your go-to podcast for mysteries with a motherly touch. Subscribe now to Moms and Mysteries wherever you get your podcasts.
It was about 6 weeks after the murder that the video surveillance from the hospital came in. This gave the investigators the timestamp of Jovan's supposed alibi. The timestamp showed he was at the hospital after 3:15 in the morning, not 2:30. This gave him more than enough time to flee the scene and show up at the hospital to try to establish an alibi. The investigators had also, during the course of their investigation, pulled footage from cameras leading into Makeva's subdivision, and they saw Dimitri's car headed in that direction, like he said. But he wasn't alone. I mean, he was alone in his own car, but following him quite closely was a smaller four-door car that matched the description of the Mazda Jovan drove. It looked to them like Dimitri was leading Jovan into the neighborhood, and it started to make sense why Dimitri's stolen car wasn't taken very far. They believed Jovan parked his car away from the house so it wouldn't be seen, and then he walked there. After the shooting, he took Dimitri's car for a fast getaway, but it only needed to get him as far as where he had parked his own vehicle. The probable cause against Jovan was adding up, and they were able to get a search warrant for his cell phone records. His cell phone pinged off the tower near the crime scene at 2:08 in the morning. Now, this evidence led them to believe that Jovan was the shooter and Dimitri was involved in setting things into motion. But the two of them lacked one thing: a motive. Jovan didn't know Makeva, and Dimitri had nothing to gain. Yuri, however, did have something to gain, or at least he thought he did. Makeva had a life insurance policy for $500,000. 5 or 6 days after her murder, Yuri called the insurance company to ask about it, only to find out he wasn't the beneficiary. They wouldn't give him any more information about the plan since he wasn't on the policy, and then he said, on the recorded line, she didn't change it in time. Didn't change it in time for what? It sounded to the investigators, who were suspecting Yuri, that he thought that she had changed it from her grandmother over to him at some point, and this was the first he learned that she hadn't. Maybe they had a conversation about changing it, but she never actually did it before he carried out a murder plot. So in looking at this as a conspiracy, the investigators saw it as Yuri being the mastermind and Jovan being the shooter. And as for Dimitri, he was the link between them, and his actions, or like I've been saying, inaction, that night made it clear he knew no one else was in danger. So while he didn't exactly look innocent, he was the least culpable of the three if they had to rank them. So he's the one they decided to put the pressure on to see if he would flip. So the investigators brought Dimitri in and they laid out their case, from the fast food video to the footage of Jovan following Dimitri's car into the neighborhood to the dismantling of Jovan's alibi. They let Dimitri know that they knew what happened, and it was in his best interest to help them prove it. Dimitri Dale didn't confess to everything he knew, but he admitted enough that the police then knew they were on the right track. He even agreed to call Jovan on the phone and record it for the police, and on this call, Jovan said something about how Yuri had given him $1,500, but he didn't know he was going to make him kill Makeva. The investigators now had what they needed, and they arrested 19-year-old Jovan Joseph in September of 2017 and charged him with first-degree murder. Then Dimitri, without the police asking, recorded some phone calls he had with Yuri. Dimitri told Yuri that Jovan had killed Makeva, and Yuri definitely didn't sound surprised by this news, and Dimitri said that Jovan was going to roll over on him. And Yuri told Dimitri to tell Jovan not to do that. The evidence against Yuri was put before a grand jury 6 months after the murder in December of 2017, and they returned with an indictment. 31-year-old Yuri Jenkins was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. As he was put into the police car in handcuffs, he told the media that he was innocent and God would vindicate him. And while he was counting on God to vindicate him, Jovan was busy implicating him. A major motivator for Jovan to start talking to the state about cutting a deal was a piece of paper his mom found in her house and turned over to the authorities. On the top of it was written the words, "game plan," and what followed was, more or less, the plan to kill Makeva. Makeva's brother Quay told the show Does Murder Sleep that he thought Jovan wrote it out just in case he was also killed in the process of staging this home invasion, and he would want it to be found so the police would know what really happened. So Quay's role in all of this is really sad. He thought this was a home invasion, and he acted that way. He thought he and his brother-in-law were going through this trauma together, when it was really all set up by Yuri. Yuri talked him out of trying to stop the gunman, and Quay had beaten himself up over not doing more to save Makeva. And that's because he didn't realize that she had been targeted. There was never a question of Quay giving his life for Makeva because it wasn't either or. If he intervened, he would have been killed and then Makeva. There were very few scenarios here where Makeva survived that night, and I hope Quay has found some type of peace in regards to that. Nothing he did or didn't do was going to change things. And if there is any peace here, it's in Jovan finally telling the truth so they knew what really happened. I mean, he really did wait until he was out of options to get out of this, but he did eventually come forward in exchange for a plea deal. He would have to testify against Yuri Jenkins, and he would be allowed to plead guilty to second-degree murder, which he did in the summer of 2019. His sentencing was put on hold until Yuri's trial, which was scheduled for January of 2020. But that trial did not happen. During the jury selection phase, Makeva's mother approached a prospective juror during lunch and allegedly said that Yuri was guilty. Several members of the jury pool had overheard that, and according to Law and Crime, one juror said she also mentioned something about having a gun and wanting to use it. As soon as the judge excluded all of the potential jurors who had heard something they weren't supposed to hear, they just didn't have enough people to move forward. The trial was then rescheduled for April of 2020, but ahead of that, the police moved in and arrested Dimitri Dale in North Carolina. They charged him with first-degree murder because what Jovan told them about Dimitri's role implicated him in a lot more than he admitted to. But around the time of Dimitri's arrest, the global pandemic stopped the courts and Yuri's trial was once again postponed. It would not be held for another 2 years in May of 2022. By this point, Dimitri had also cut a deal in exchange for his testimony. He pleaded out to manslaughter for his role in Makeva's murder and got 45 days in jail, followed by 15 years of probation. Now, don't worry if you think this is too light of a sentence. He's currently in prison serving several years for statutory rape, so it's not like he's roaming free. But if we try to actually say what Dimitri's role was in this, it's a little hard to say because he and Jovan told different stories. And this was a huge issue for the state going into trial. Not only had Dimitri and Jovan lied to the police repeatedly about what happened that night, once they got to trial, they were telling different stories when they were both saying they were finally telling the truth. With both of the key witnesses in this case being admitted liars, the prosecutor had to address what she called the elephant in the room at the beginning of their testimony. Both men admitted they had lied in the past, but they were going to tell the truth now because they were ready to take responsibility for what they did. But since they didn't then tell the same story, we know at least one of them was still lying, at least in part. Dimitri testified first, and he testified that he was hanging out with Yuri on June 27th, 2017, and Yuri told him that he needed to tell him something, but that Dimitri would think he was crazy. Dimitri asked him what it was, and Yuri responded with a question. What if he wanted to pay to have someone killed? Dimitri asked, why would he want to do something like that, and who did he even want to kill? And Yuri first responded, his father, which shocked Dimitri, who had grown up with Yuri's father as his minister. But when Dimitri said, your dad? Yuri said he was just kidding. Then he said he actually wanted Makeva killed. He said he didn't love her anymore. At this point in their conversation, Dimitri's phone was going off with text messages from various people he was supposed to give rides to, so the conversation ended with that, and Dimitri said he would come back later. Dimitri then went to pick up 2 young women. One was his girlfriend, and he also went to pick Jovan up to give him a ride home. Dimitri told all 3 that he needed to go talk to his friend because his friend was, quote, talking crazy about killing someone. he wanted them to wait in the car while he talked to this friend. Now, one of the women was smart and said, no thanks, so Dmitry dropped her off. In the end, it was Dmitry in the driver's seat, his girlfriend in the passenger seat, and then Jovan was in the back seat behind Dmitry. The three got to Yuri's house, and Dmitry talked to Yuri outside the car about killing Makeva. Yuri wanted to know if Dmitry knew anyone who would do it for him, and Dmitry said he didn't hang out with the sort of people who would commit murder. But then he opened the car door and asked Jovan if he knew anyone. Jovan then got out of the car and asked Yuri how much he was going to pay, and the plan formed over the course of an hour. Quay came out of the house during this conversation, but Yuri told him to go inside and check on the kids. Dmitry also went inside at some point to use the bathroom, and when he came back out, they left. So he wasn't around for some of the conversation going over the final plans. Dmitry dropped Jovan off at his house, and then he and his girlfriend went back to his house. Dmitry directly denied that he brought Jovan over there specifically to connect him and Yuri in order to have Makeva murdered. He was just giving Jovan a ride, and that happened to be somewhere they stopped along the way. But Jovan's testimony was different. He said that introducing Yuri and Jovan for the sake of the murder was part of the plan, and Dmitry knew what he was doing. But back to Dmitry's version. He testified that on June 28th, Yuri called Dmitry and wished him a happy birthday. He turned 19 that day, and Yuri asked if he was coming over, and he wanted Dmitry to bring Jovan. Dmitry said he got ready, he picked up Jovan, and then they went over to Yuri's house, arriving while Yuri was doing some yard work. They helped him with the yard work, and then Jovan got a haircut, and then they played basketball. Most of this was witnessed by Quay. Quay would testify that at some point that day, Dmitry and Jovan were talking in the driveway, and when he approached them, they got real quiet. It was enough to be awkward, but not enough to be suspicious. According to Dmitry, when he and Jovan got into the car to leave that day, he realized that Jovan had a gun wrapped in his shirt. Dmitry was mad that Jovan had gotten into his car with a gun because he had a rule against people bringing guns into his car, and he was particularly upset that he wasn't told, just in case he got pulled over. Dmitry and Jovan then picked Dmitry's mom up at work, and they went through the Miami Sub drive-thru, which is where they ran out of gas. After getting a gas can, going to the gas station, filling up the car, Dmitry then dropped Jovan off at his house and took his mom home. Dmitry testified that Yuri kept calling him, asking him when he was coming back over and if he was bringing Jovan with him. Dmitry said he was tired at that point and just wanted to stay home, but he gave in and told Yuri they would come over. Dmitry said that he agreed to bring Jovan with him back to Yuri's house, but he wouldn't let him in his car because of the previous incident with the gun. According to Dmitry, that's why Jovan was seen driving his own car to the neighborhood. But Jovan's testimony was that this wasn't true. Dmitry did call him and told him tonight's the night, and then told him to bring his own car. According to Jovan, it had nothing to do with him previously bringing a gun into Dmitry's car, and everything to do with this being part of the murder plot. And this is how the testimony at this trial went. Dmitry would do whatever he could to distance himself from the conspiracy, and Jovan would contradict him, pulling him right back in. But back to what Dmitry testified to. He said that as they approached the neighborhood, Yuri called him and told him to have Jovan park away from the house. Dmitry said he didn't really push for a reason because he didn't want to know. He knew there had been talk about Jovan killing Makeva, but he didn't want the details because he didn't want to be involved. Obviously, Jovan says this wasn't true and that Dmitry was present pretty much every time they made any plans. But back to Dmitry. He said that he pulled over and Jovan parked. Jovan then got into his car and they drove to Makeva and Yuri's house. Dmitry testified that Yuri was outside when they pulled up, and Yuri told Dmitry and Jovan that it had to happen right away. Dmitry said he didn't want anything to happen while he was there, but Yuri said it was perfect timing. Makeva's oldest child wasn't in town, Makeva was asleep, and Quay had left to go to the local 7-Eleven. Jovan's story differs a bit here as well. In his version, it sounds more like Yuri wanted Quay to be there to back up the home invasion staging. Anyway, Dmitry said Quay's car pulled up while they were talking, but before Quay could see or overhear anything, Yuri told Jovan to wait a few minutes and then come inside. According to Dmitry, this is when Yuri told him to ask for Quest, but Jovan testified that Dmitry is the one who told him to ask for Quest, but he did it earlier in the evening when they were going over the plan. Again, Dmitry trying to get out of this conspiracy and Jovan pulling him right back in. Then the home invasion happened the way Quay said it did, but Quay didn't see something. While they were upstairs, Jovan saw Yuri cock his head in the direction of Makeva's bedroom door, and that's how he knew which room to go into. So the state's case largely rested on the contradictory testimony of two admitted liars. And this was not lost on Quay, who was in the courthouse thinking about how Yuri might get away with it. According to Quay, he just sort of went blank. He barged into the courtroom and started making his way to where Yuri sat at the defense table. He said he wanted to choke him out, but he was intercepted before he got very far. The jury was present for this outburst, and the defense could have asked for a mistrial, but they opted not to. And the judge told Quay he was barred from the courtroom for the remainder of the trial, except for when he was testifying. When Jovan testified, in addition to the things I've already brought up, he claimed that Yuri paid him $10,000 for the murder and was supposed to pay another $10,000 after he got the life insurance money. Jovan had previously told the police that he had only been given $1,500, and this is relevant because one problem the state had was proving that Yuri had any money to give to Jovan. Makeva ran that household. She managed all of the money, and Yuri didn't make a lot of money directly. He told the police himself that he would help Makeva with her business, but he wouldn't draw a direct salary because he was trying to avoid getting it garnished for child support. The money that he could have hidden from Makeva was cash he got from when he cut people's hair. But $10,000? That's a lot of haircuts. $1,500 was a lot easier of a number for the state to get to, but now they had to work with this $10,000 up front because that's what their witness said happened. The defense ended up not presenting any witnesses, and that includes Yuri, who did not take the stand in his own defense, but the jury did hear from him anyway. He spoke to the police, including one time after his arrest. His defense attorney did try to get that interview tossed because he didn't have an attorney present, and he had previously invoked his Miranda rights. But before this interview, when he was read his rights again, he ended up waiving them, so the jury did get to hear this. And what they heard was the investigator confronting Yuri on multiple points. For instance, they had previously asked Yuri for his phone, and he told them he left it in the car. But the officer saw it in his pocket and pointed it out. And this turned out to be a phone Yuri said was for clients, but looked more like a phone he was hiding from his wife. There was a lot on there about Tiffany, making it clear that their relationship was not over. Yuri also denied being surprised that he wasn't the beneficiary on the policy. He said he knew he wasn't because they didn't want the state to be able to garnish that money for child support in the event something happened to Makeva. So the investigator asked Yuri if he knew he wasn't the beneficiary on the policy, why did he even call the life insurance company? And he said he called because everyone was pressuring him to call, thinking that maybe it had gotten changed to him, and so he was just checking. Yuri had an answer for everything that the investigators threw at him, but I won't say these were persuasive answers. After 3 hours of deliberation, the jury found Yuri guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced him to life in prison. Jovan Joseph was then sentenced to 15 years. A year after the trial, Yuri did speak to 2020 in an interview to plead his case for innocence, and he said that Dmitry did have a motive. He knew that he and Makeva were making decent money, and that he plotted with his friend Jovan on their own to rob them. But again, as a robbery, this just doesn't make sense. If the goal was to simply rob the house, why was Makeva the one shot? She was sleeping. She was no threat to them. Yuri Jenkins was a much bigger threat, yet he was not just not shot, he was left alone with the opportunity to get away that he decided not to take. And as I think about this case and I reflect on it a bit, I have to say it's been hard to think about how Yuri could have gotten acquitted because of the lies, in my opinion, of Dimitri Dale. To me, it seems the most likely explanation is that Jovan was telling the truth and Dimitri got on that stand and tried to distance himself from the conspiracy. He, allegedly, in my opinion only, lied. And because Jovan wasn't going to lie right alongside him, the jury could have decided that the contradictory statements of co-conspirators was just not enough evidence. Dimitri had already made his deal, so he had very little to lose by telling the truth at this point, except possibly standing in the community. Justice for Makeva Jenkins had to hinge on the testimony of a liar. And it's a messy fact how often our court system has to rely on dishonest people to somehow get to the truth. But thankfully, in this case, it somehow worked out. Thank you for listening. If you want more content, check out my other show, Crimelines and Consequences, wherever you get your podcasts. I also offer bonus content and ad-free listening at patreon.com/crimelines or through the Apple Podcast app. If you want to buy me a coffee, the official drink of Crimelines, you can give a one-time donation at basement4productions.com/support.